When we talk about Mashiach, or as some people call it, the M word, it's very nice. It's a nice theory. It's a great idea. Mashiach, yeah, very nice. It's something to talk about. If you're a rabbi, you're supposed to end every speech that you give with the, please God, we should merit the imminent arrival of Mashiach. But what does it actually mean? Tachlis, as we say in the classics. Realistically, down here on earth, in the 21st century, what does it really mean? It sounds so far-fetched. It sounds so impossible. We have a program in Johannesburg in South Africa. It's not run by Chabad. It's run by the school system, where they take all the grade 11s for 1 week towards the end of the year, and they take them away on a retreat, essentially, between you and I, maybe I should cover the microphone, to brainwash them. That's basically what they do. They take them, they deprive them of sleep, they don't give them good food to eat, they live in very rudimentary accommodation, and they bombard them with Judaism for a week. And these kids all come out of there bamboozled, and they arrive home, they don't know what's happened to them, suddenly they're wearing tzitzit, and they're keeping Shabbos, and they're keeping kosher, and 3 weeks later they're back to normal. So, on this particular retreat that they always have somebody come and speak to the children about Mashiach. Because, you're giving them the whole Jewish experience. You have to speak about Mashiach. So who are you going to get to speak to people about Mashiach? Who else? If not a Chabadnik. In fact, I'll tell you a story. We once had a Shabbaton in Johannesburg. It was a unity Shabbaton. Various communities got together across the spectrum of the Jewish communities, and we had about 200 young adults together for a Shabbaton. And on Saturday night, they put up a panel where all the rabbis sat, and it was Ask the Rabbi Anything. And to be honest, I thought it was going to be a failure. It was the most successful event of the entire Shabbaton. People came, they were pelting us with questions. It was fantastic. We were sitting in a row, and there was one person who was also a rabbi, I might add, not a Chabad rabbi, and it was his job to be the moderator of the session. So you would ask a question, and it'd say, okay, Rabbi so-and-so is going to answer that question. And so he went sort of through the room, so it should be fair and equitable, and everybody would have an opportunity to answer. So somebody raised their hand and said, I have a question, and the question was about Mashiach. So without even batting an eyelid, this guy says, I was the only Chabadnik there. I was the token Chabadnik. Like one of these, what do they call them? What do we call it in South Africa? BEE. What's the translation of BEE? Affirmative action, yeah, that's right. So I was the affirmative action rabbi over there, representing the minorities. And anyhow, so somebody puts up their hand and says, I have a question on Mashiach. They said, Rabbi Shishler is going to answer that question, because it's a known thing. If you talk Mashiach, you're talking Chabad. So when we go to this program for these grade 11s and I have to speak about Mashiach, they give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes out of a week to speak about Mashiach. So I got these kids for 10 minutes. What's the first thing you're going to say to them? All right, guys, tell me something. Do you believe in Mashiach? Yeah, Rabbi, we believe in Mashiach. It's on Friday. They've been brainwashed already for most of the week. Yeah, we believe in Mashiach. And then I say to them, so how many of you believe that Mashiach is imminent? How many of you believe Mashiach's going to happen in your lifetime or in your school career? Pretty much as silent as this. And my favorite line to use with them, which is what I believe that the Rebbe wanted to teach us about how to view and get our head around Mashiach, is if you do not believe that Mashiach is an unfolding reality right now, either you know nothing about Mashiach or you know nothing about what's going on in the world. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, is quoted to have said that when Mashiach comes, you'll read about it in the newspapers. I'm afraid we have to modify that. When Mashiach comes, you will see it on a Facebook update or a WhatsApp. Anybody who's familiar with Chabad history will know that in the 1980s there was a very painful episode that happened. The Rebbe found it very personally painful, where somebody stole books from the library that was passed down from the previous Rebbe and the previous Rebbes before that. And I remember, I was a kid at the time, and I remember we were talking about when is it going to happen? When is the court going to rule? It went to court, and there was this great debate about who the books belonged to, whether the private possession of the family members or the public possession of the entire movement. And we were all absolutely confident that there's no question the court is going to rule in the Rebbe's favor. The question is only when it will happen. And the words that we used in the Chabad world, the code words, were didan notzach, which is an expression from the Talmud, that our side has been victorious. And I remember we spoke about this. We were kids in high school. Other kids maybe were into other things, but for us this was obsessive. And I'll never forget, one evening the phone rang in my parents' home, and I picked up the phone, and a friend of mine said, didan notzach, just those two words. And it was this explosive moment. It was so exciting. It really happened. It really happened. And we rushed off to the main Chabad house, and there was a hookup in those days. There was no streaming in those days. So that moment where it seemed to, on the one hand, be absolute, it was going to happen. On the other hand, it seemed so ethereal out there. Who knows when, who knows how, is it actually going to be? And Mashiach is the same type of a reality. It's something where, in theory, if you read the books, and it sounds very nice, this beautiful utopian world that's going to happen at some point in the distant future, let the Cossacks go to Jerusalem. And the Rebbe wanted us to believe and understand and appreciate and observe a world where it's in the newspapers, where it's current events, where Mashiach is not a theory, Mashiach is actually the reality. But because it's such a comfortable reality, we don't watch it unfold. I know what we're expecting. We're all expecting one day there's going to be this cataclysmic event. We'll just be doing our ordinary thing, and then there's going to be this great shofar blast, and it's going to be noisy, and it's going to be exciting, and people will be running through the streets saying the Messiah has arrived. And that's how we'll know it happened, right? That's pretty much what we expect. Something along the lines to, I hate to use a negative example, but that terrible surprise of September 11th that nobody saw coming, and when it happened, it riveted the entire world to their TV screens as the drama unfolded. Something like that. So either we don't know enough about what's happening in the world, or we don't know enough about Mashiach, or perhaps both. Because the Rebbe schooled us using a phrase to open our eyes. The Rebbe schooled us that what's going on in the world is a natural progression towards Mashiach. Mashiach is not going to be superimposed onto our reality with shock value. One day we wake up and, oh my gosh, what happened? It's going to be a natural progression. The same sort of natural progression where one day you look in the mirror and you think, oh my gosh, what happened? You don't feel it happening. It's like when you visit your nephews that you haven't seen for a few decades, and suddenly they stand taller than you. And you say, wow, what happened? And they didn't feel the progress. They didn't feel the transition. So the way that the Rebbe schooled us to understand Mashiach is not this fundamental, dramatic change that's going to happen one day in the world, but read the papers. Read the news. Observe what's going on. See how the world is naturally progressing to an entirely different world to what we imagine. And if we had to go back, and I remember at the time, there were times that the Rebbe spoke about current events in the 90s and said, you see that? That's a sign of Mashiach. So for example, we were supposed to be doing our, what we call in South Africa, matric year, which is grade 12. It's a very big deal. It's a whole type of avodah zarah in its own right. This worship of the diploma that you're going to get at the end of your school career. And at the same time, there was something much more interesting happening, which was the first international war that was ever broadcast live on CNN, which was the Gulf War, the Iraq incursion into Kuwait, and then, of course, the whole multinational response and the Scud missiles and the threats to Israel. It was really fascinating. So when we were supposed to be studying for exams, we used to sneak over to a friend's house so we could watch CNN, because surely we were supposed to be learning history. And at that time, the Rebbe was talking about, look, do you see what's happening? Signs of Mashiach. And I'm not going to get into the details because unfortunately we don't have the time. But it was fascinating how the Rebbe was on the mark, and how the Rebbe said Israel will be the safest place, and how the Rebbe said that this is a sign of the messianic age. There's an ancient midrash that describes this battle that would happen in the Middle East just before Mashiach comes, and how the Jews would be running helter-skelter saying, where should we go? How do we protect ourselves? And in the end, it would just be a sign of God saying, I'm here, everything I did was for your sakes. The problem is that 10 years later, people will still saying, how do we know that Mashiach is coming now? Because in 1990 there was a war in Iraq. Or in the same vein, when the Rebbe spoke about the collapse of communism, which he saw as one of the most fundamental shifts in the entire energy centers of this world, a government, a whole superpower that made as its mission the destruction of religion, the destruction of faith in God, and this whole system collapsing almost unexpectedly. And the Rebbe spoke about that as a sign of we're living in the times of Mashiach. And 10 years later, or 20 years later, people are still saying, you see, because communism fell, that's how we know we're living in the time of Mashiach. But in effect, what the Rebbe was illustrating to us is, this is how a Jew today is supposed to look at the world. We're supposed to look for these events. We're supposed to look for this type of progress happening in our world because it is there. Things which we read about in the news and we say, interesting. We have conversations around coffee tables and we say, have you heard? Like it's just a curiosity. And we don't pause for a moment to recognize that these are things which are radical revolutions in the world that we're living in. And here's the kicker, that they were all referred to in the prophecies of biblical times or in the writings of the Talmudic scholars and Kabbalists. And that's what the Rebbe wants us to look at the world as an evolution of messianic times. So I think it's something that you do yourself. You actually don't need me for this. You could do it yourself. There are all sorts of things available. Thank God today we have this wonderful resource called the internet. It provides an infinite amount of opportunity to waste your life. But on the other hand, it offers an incredible access to information that nobody ever had previously in history. You know, there's a saying in the Talmud. The Talmud says, when you get to heaven, Ashrei mi sheba lekan v'talmudai b'yadai. Praised is he who comes here to the world to come holding his study in his hand. Well, thank God today we can all do that. We all have a little device. You can download all the texts that you need. You can hold the Talmud in your hand. We have access to information in an unprecedented fashion. But if we know how to look at that information with the right eye, we'll see things which are absolutely mind-boggling. Again, if we had the full amount of time allocated, I would have shared more examples, and I do apologize again. But I just want to share with you a couple of things that I picked up on the internet, because this is what I do. I enjoy playing around on the internet and finding what's going on in the worlds of geopolitics, technology, health, social dynamics, and just reflecting them back to things which are written about in the Torah. So I figured I'll just pull out some of the things from June 2014. What's in the news in June 2014? Just as a template that you could possibly use. So, sorry, this one's from May 15th, 2014. This is from the University of Utah, where they've developed a genetic process by which they took mice that have the symptoms of MS, and they were able to fiddle with stem cells, and within a short period of time, I believe it was 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days, they had the mice walking again. Now, the study's only been released now 6 months later because they wanted to see that they continued walking. So 6 months later, the mice are still walking. These are mice that had lost the mobility of their legs. Now, why is that relevant to us? Because one of the things we're told about the Messianic age is that it's about breakthroughs in health. We believe that it will be a time of no disease. We believe it will be a time of no illness. We believe it will be a time of no disability. We believe it will be a time of longevity, incredible longevity. The prophet says that a child will die at 100 years old. Now, once upon a time, maybe that was a bit far-fetched, but if you look at the statistics, they say the amount of centenarians in the world doubles every 18 months. I don't know if you've seen recently the longest married couple in the world just celebrated their 88th wedding anniversary. Now, I do know that for some people that's enough to scare them off the thought of longevity. But the point is that when we speak about a messianic age, it does not necessarily have to be top-down superimposition miracles, but rather an awareness and awakening that happens within our world that is so normal and so natural that it belongs in the news, not in the books of the prophecies. Now, I'm not saying that curing mice of MS is necessarily a sign of Mashiach as much as it's a sign of messianic-style thinking becoming part of mainstream medical practice. Let us fight disease. A few years ago, and he's quite a controversial character, In fact, there are a few controversial characters on the fringes of science. But there's a very controversial guy, I don't know if you've heard of him, called Ray Kurzweil. Heard of him? And he's got some fascinating insights into what he believes will become the singularity, this coalescence of technology and human beings. You know, things like implanting chips in our brains, or like the Israeli pill. You've seen the Israeli pill that you could swallow. It's a camera. It stops you needing to have a colonoscopy or gastroscopy, because you just swallow this pill and it goes in and films the insides and sends the information back to the doctors. So he speaks about the fact that aging is a disease. It's genetic. It's the single most prolific disease that exists. It affects everybody, and it's fatal in all cases. And so he proposes that we therefore need to treat aging as we would any disease, which is to seek a cure, to seek a way to reverse it. The Torah says the messianic age is a time where at 100 years old, if somebody dies, we call them a child. If you read the news, you begin to understand and appreciate that these way far out messianic prophecies are actually the sort of things that we're talking about in day-to-day experiences. I'll come back in a moment to a very interesting one that I came across. Here's another one. You know, Google and Facebook are having a major competition at the moment about trying to get to reach all those people who do not have normal internet connectivity. Are you aware of this? People like us who come from Africa are very aware of this. We have, in South Africa, we have a lot of fixed line technology, and they're rolling out optic cable now, and it's fantastic. The only problem is we have a very unstable power grid. So, for example, as I was coming here now, I saw that there is a power outage right now in certain areas of Johannesburg, which has been a chronic problem recently. So Google is in the process of, listen to this, reaching 4.8 billion people who are not yet online by launching 180 satellites to cover those areas where they do not have either fixed line technology or they do not have the stable power grid, as we have, to maintain that technology. And this way, internet will be everywhere. Now, of course, it's unusual to have religious Jews get up and say, yes, internet, good thing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, please God, in the next session, which will hopefully be a complete session. But what is significant about it is that we believe that one of the signs of the Messianic age, as prophesied by the prophet Isaiah, is that he says the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the ocean covers the seabed. That knowledge will be accessible everywhere and instantaneously, and everybody should have equal access to knowledge. The only little change between Google and us is that the knowledge we're talking about is knowledge of God. Awareness of God. One of the primary things we speak about in the Messianic age is a different way of learning, because the way that we typically learn now is auditory, primarily auditory. We listen to things, we take them in one step at a time. Whereas in the Messianic age, we'll have visual learning. You know what the difference is between visual and auditory learning? Well, let's do this right now. If I had to stand up over here and stop talking about Mashiach for a moment and pick up the phone and call my wife back home and describe the crowd that's sitting here, how long would it take me to describe everybody who's sitting in this room? Take a while, right? It'll take a while. Luckily, I'm a man, so it wouldn't take as long as if it was her describing to me. But, you know, it would take a while. Whereas if I whipped out my phone and took a picture and sent it to her, visual experience is immediate. It captures everything at once. And we're told the fundamental difference of how we process information now and how we will process information in the Messianic age is the difference between bite-sized, step-at-a-time, auditory processing, which is the common form of learning now, and this immediate, cohesive picture of everything that will happen in the visual learning of the time of Mashiach. And so to have, again, in the technological world, this concept of this umbrella of satellites beaming information that you will see rather than hear or read is for us part of the unfolding of the Messianic era. Sure, there's a lot more over here which I don't have time for right now. I'm going to do one that's interesting, I think. I forget where it was. It was in China. in China, they came up with a new thing, how to reconnect severed nerves. Now, we know that that's one of the big challenges in medicine, is, God forbid, if a person has permanent damage to their nerves, that's where you get paralysis. So they have successfully, in China now, used liquid metal to reconnect nerves because apparently it has a conductivity that actually works. Now, I don't understand these things, and I don't claim to be a medical person, but to me that's another fascinating example of the process of the medical world and how it is getting in line with this idea of the body doesn't have to fall apart at a certain age. A person doesn't have to get ill just because that's how it always used to be. Probably one of the most powerful messages of the Messianic era is when the prophet Isaiah says they will beat their swords into plowshares. Now, you can picture the sign, the picture, right? Mashiach comes. Everybody's got to go out and find some old plows and beat them into swords. Not that we would use either of them. But clearly the message is to take the technologies of war, the technologies of destruction, and begin to use them as technologies which are beneficial to society. So can we do a little exercise over here? Let's see how many swords to plowshares technologies we could come up with in this room right now in the space of 30 seconds. In other words, any technology that was originally invented for the purpose of war and is now used for peaceful or life-enhancing uses. Nuclear, that would be a great example, right? We understand that the Manhattan Project was because they needed to wipe out, initially they thought perhaps the Germans, but eventually the Japanese. It was very much for the purpose of war. And today, most of our cities are powered by nuclear energy. So that would be a great example. And any other examples? Cell phones, satellites, laser, internet. I was waiting for somebody to say that. Internet. How about this one? In the Gulf War, that same Gulf War I was referring to before, they developed for the first time high-level precision bombing systems. So in other words, if you remember at the time, it was one of the things that they were speaking about a lot on CNN was how the planes could fly at twice the speed of sound and hit a target literally within a few feet, which was unheard of, was unparalleled. Now those same technologies today are used in various forms of radiation therapy. For people who have cancerous cells, but it's dangerous to bombard the body with that amount of radiation. If they can pinpoint only the cells which are malignant and spare the rest of the body, they can treat much more quickly using what I believe they call a cyber knife, which is based on the technology originally developed for bombing sites in Iraq. Now, we could really go on, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. I want to share one with you, which I did not expect to find. It was published last week, Tuesday, the 24th of June, and it says, Red heifer discovered, major obstacle to the rebuilding of the Jewish temple removed. And for interest's sake, this is from a website called rightsidenews.com, which is not a Jewish website. I don't even know how they found this, and it should dafka be in the Torah portion of the red heifer, as it so happens. I thought that was absolutely mind-boggling. I think if there's one message for us to take, the Rebbe's message, to open our eyes, and perhaps I suppose to open our minds, it's to appreciate that the concept of Mashiach is not supposed to be a far-fetched sci-fi sort of a reality, but the most normal thing that you would read about in the news, because we are reading about these things in the news all the time. I'll leave you with a teaser, just a few thoughts that you could look at. Look at the sources in Judaism that speak about the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. Look at the sources in Judaism that speak about, in the Messianic age, there'll be the rise of feminine energy. Look, for example, in the concept, and I think this is very powerful, of how in the Messianic age, the seat of power will not sit with individuals who are powerful, but rather with ordinary citizens. Because the time of Mashiach is where we reveal the inner power within each of us. There's an absolute fortune to know about this, and I really strongly believe it's our responsibility as Jewish people to make it part of our regular reading and regular research. And please God, more than anything else, the unfolding of the Messianic age should be a smooth and clear process until one minute we turn around and we say, aha, I get it. It's here. Thank you very much.